My peaceful rides with Thunder turned into a war when the HOA and Miss S. Walsh tried to ban my horse from our streets. They thought they had all the power until they found out my quiet dad was about to be sworn in as mayor. What would you do if your HOA tried to control you, only to realize you had the power to fight back? If you've ever had to deal with a power-hungry HOA, you need to hear this story. Smash that like button if you think HOAs have too much control. Drop a comment if you've ever fought back. And hit that subscribe button because, trust me, this gets wild. The morning air was crisp, laced with the scent of damp earth, as Thunder's steady hoofbeats echoed along the quiet streets of Willow Creek Estates. The rhythmic sound had always been a comfort, a reminder of the mornings I used to spend with Mom before she passed away. Riding through the neighborhood was more than a routine. It was a connection, a piece of my old life I refused to let go of. But the peace shattered with the loud bang of a door slamming. Thunder jerked beneath me, ears flicking back in alarm. I barely had time to steady him before she appeared. Miss S. Walsh, standing at the edge of her pristine driveway, her pink bathrobe fluttering like some sort of battle flag. Her face twisted as if she'd bitten into something rotten. And when she pointed a trembling, bony finger at me, her voice cut through the air like a whip. "You stop right there!" I sighed, already feeling the familiar heat of frustration creeping up my spine. I pulled gently on Thunder's reins, bringing him to a halt. "Good morning, Miss S. Walsh," one said, forcing a polite smile that hurt my cheeks. "Beautiful day for a ride, isn't it?" Thunder snorted softly, as if agreeing. Miss Essen. Walsh stomped onto the asphalt, her fuzzy slippers absurdly out of place in her fury. "Look at what that beast is doing to our roads. Hoof marks everywhere. Do you have any idea how much we pay for maintenance?" I glanced at the spotless pavement. There wasn't a single crack or mark out of place. "The road looks fine to me, Miss S. Walsh," one said evenly. "And this is a public street, not HOA property." Her face turned red. "Don't get smart with me, young lady. This is a respectable neighborhood, not some farm. I am on the HOA board, and we have rules about livestock." I kept my voice calm, though my heart pounded. Thunder isn't livestock. He's my pet, my riding companion. A flicker of movement caught my eye neighbors peeking from their windows, watching. Mr. Rodriguez, standing across the street, gave me a subtle thumbs up. At least not everyone here thought I was some kind of menace. "I've checked the city ordinances," I continued, gripping Thunder's reins tighter. "Riding horses on public roads is legal." Miss S. Walsh's face darkened to the color of a ripe tomato. She yanked out her phone with shaking fingers. "We'll see about that. I'm calling Mr. Perkins right now." I nudged Thunder forward. "Feel free," I said, my voice steady even as my stomach churned. "Have a nice day, Mrs. Walsh." One didn't have to turn around to hear her furious voice spitting into her phone. The war had begun. The moment I turned onto our driveway, I knew something was wrong. A cream-colored envelope was taped to the screen door, its bold red letters practically screaming at me before I even got close enough to read them. Violation notice. A lump formed in my throat as I ripped the letter open, my eyes scanning the formal, soulless text. "Dear Miller family, it has come to the attention of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association that you are in violation of Covenant 7.4. 2. No livestock, poultry, or other animals, except common household pets, shall be kept on any lot or common areas. Your continued housing and parading of a horse through our community streets constitutes a serious violation of community standards. You are hereby ordered to remove said livestock within 48 hours or face a $500 initial fine, followed by $100 daily penalties. Additionally, riding horses on community streets is strictly prohibited effective immediately. Regards, Harold Perkins, HOA President." My hands shook as I read it again, my chest tightening. Remove Thunder? Like he was some piece of furniture that could just be thrown away? My fingers dug into the paper as my stomach twisted into a knot. They couldn't do this. I yanked out my phone and dialed Dad. It rang once, twice, straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached James Miller. I'm unavailable right now, but leave a message and I'll call back as soon as possible." I swallowed the rising panic and tried to keep my voice steady. "Dad, the HOA left a notice. They're saying we have to get rid of Thunder in 48 hours. They're trying to fine us. Please call me back." Hanging up, I clenched the paper in my fist. No, Thunder wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, I barely made it out the door before Miss S. Walsh's smug voice stopped me in my tracks. Well, she drawled, arms crossed over her chest. "Looks like your little pony show is over." I froze on the sidewalk, my fingers tightening around my backpack straps. Standing beside her was Mr. Perkins, the bald-headed HOA president who once sent my dad a 7-page letter over our grass being a 1/4 inch too tall. His beady eyes watched me like a hawk, waiting for a reaction. I forced my feet forward, ignoring them both, but my heart pounded with anger. They thought they had won. By the time I reached the bus stop, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Zoe, OMG. Check the neighborhood Facebook page. Now, dread coiled in my stomach as I opened the app. The moment the screen loaded, my breath caught in my throat. "Health hazard in our neighborhood, Miss S." Walsh had posted a blurry picture of Thunder and me riding down the street, followed by a full-on attack in the caption. "The Miller family is keeping a horse in their backyard and allowing it to defecate on our roads. Property values plummeting. Children at risk of disease. Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7:00 p.m. at the Perkins residence to address this crisis." My blood turned ice cold as I scrolled through the comments. "This is outrageous. My daughter has allergies." Karen Thompson, "I pay too much in HOA fees to live next to a farm." Harold Perkins, "Has anyone reported this to animal control?" Diane Walsh, "The fury hit me so fast, it made my hands tremble. They were painting me as some careless, disgusting animal hoarder, as if I let Thunder run wild, trashing the neighborhood, as if I wasn't out there every morning with a shovel and a bucket, making sure the roads were spotless." But then, as I scrolled further, I saw something else. Not everyone was against me. "That girl takes excellent care of her horse. This is ridiculous." Miguel Rodriguez, "The Millers checked all the permits before building that small stable. It's fully legal." Sarah Chun, "Pretty sure public roads aren't HOA jurisdiction anyway." Tom Blackwell, "A tiny flicker of hope pushed through the anger. At least some people knew the truth." I dialed Dad again, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Straight to voicemail. I stormed into school, barely aware of my surroundings. My mind kept circling back to that post, to the thought of losing Thunder, to the rage bubbling just beneath my skin. By the time the final bell rang, I was ready to march straight into that HOA meeting myself. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. I barely noticed the walk home from the bus stop, my thoughts spinning so fast they blurred together. The HOA meeting was happening tonight, and I had no idea what they were planning except that it involved getting rid of Thunder. My hands clenched at my sides. They wanted a fight? They were about to get one. But first, I needed ammunition. The house was silent when I stepped inside. Dad wasn't home. Again, I tossed my backpack onto the couch and made a beeline for his office. If there was something, anything, that could prove we were in the right, it would be in here. His filing cabinet stood tall in the corner, an intimidating fortress of meticulous organization. I yanked open the drawer labeled Property Willow Creek, my fingers flying over the folders. And then I found it. A thick folder labeled HOA Covenants and City Ordinances. My heart pounded as I flipped through the documents. Then I saw it. Covenant 7.42, HOA Animal Restrictions. It was the exact rule they had quoted in the violation notice. The words, "no livestock, poultry, or other animals, except common household pets," stared back at me. But scribbled in Dad's handwriting in the margin was something else. Horses exempt. City Ordinance 14.3, supersedes HOA regulations. Confirmed with City Attorney May 15, 2021. My breath caught. We were right. The city laws protected us. Thunder was legal, and the HOA had no power to change that. I flipped to another page and found a permit for our stable, signed and approved by both the city and the HOA Architectural Committee 2 years ago. They knew. They knew, and they were lying. A sticky note was attached to the next page, scrawled with a name and number, Jennifer Wilson, City Attorney. My fingers trembled as I took pictures of every document with my phone. Then, outside, headlights flashed across the living room windows. I froze. Across the street, a cluster of cars had pulled into the Perkins driveway. People filed inside the emergency HOA meeting was starting. I didn't think. I just moved. Snatching up the folder, I shoved it into my backpack, my pulse roaring in my ears. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the rush of adrenaline. I wasn't going to sit back and let them decide Thunder's fate without me there. I stormed across the street, up the perfectly manicured path to the Perkins front door. My fingers hovered over the doorbell for only a second before I slammed it. The door swung open, revealing Miss S. Perkins, her face pinched in surprise. "Ellie, what are you doing here?" I squared my shoulders. "I'm here for the HOA meeting about my horse," I said firmly. "Since it concerns me directly, I should be present." From inside the house, I heard Miss S. Walsh's shrill voice. "This is outrageous." I wasn't backing down. The air inside the Perkins house was thick with tension. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, filled with familiar faces, neighbors who had smiled at me for years, who had waved when I rode past on Thunder. But now, those same people stared at me like I was the enemy. At the front of the room, standing behind a small podium, was Mr. Perkins. His expression was carefully neutral, but the gleam in his eyes told me he thought he had already won. Miss S. Walsh, seated in the front row, shot to her feet the second she saw me. "This is outrageous," she spat. "She's not a homeowner. She doesn't belong here." Before Mrs. Perkins could shove me back out the door, Mr. Rodriguez spoke up from the back. "The girl has a right to be here," he said. "This meeting is about her horse, isn't it?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Miss S. Perkins pursed her lips, clearly unhappy, but stepped aside. I walked straight to the front, ignoring Mrs. Walsh's glare. I had one chance to shut this down, one chance to make them listen. Mr. Perkins cleared his throat. "Since you're here, Eleanor, perhaps you'd like to explain why you think the HOA's rules don't apply to you?" I took a deep breath and set my backpack on the floor. "Because they don't," I said, pulling out the folder. A ripple of shock passed through the room as I held up the documents. "The HOA notice says, I'm violating Covenant 7.4. 2, by keeping Thunder," I continued. "But Willow Creek Falls is under City Ordinance 14.3, which explicitly allows horses on residential properties that meet stable requirements, which mine does." I flipped to the permit for our stable, holding it up for everyone to see. This was approved by both the city and the HOA Architectural Committee 2 years ago. Mr. Perkins adjusted his glasses. "Well, that may be, but riding the horse through the neighborhood is still also protected," I cut in, my voice steady. City Ordinance 14. 3 states that horses are permitted on all public roadways within city limits. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd. Miss S. Walsh's face turned an alarming shade of red. Mr. Perkins hesitated. For the first time, he looked uncertain. That's when a new voice cut through the room. "You don't have that right when it conflicts with city law." The room fell into silence. I turned toward the doorway, and there stood my dad. For a moment, the entire room froze. The air crackled with tension as my father stepped inside, his presence immediately shifting the balance of power. Dressed in his suit from work, he looked exhausted but completely in control, his sharp eyes sweeping over the stunned faces of the HOA board. Behind him, a woman in a professional blazer followed her confident stance, making it clear she wasn't just some bystander. "James?" Miss S. Walsh's voice wavered, a rare flicker of uncertainty creeping into her usual arrogance. "What are you doing here?" Dad met her gaze, calm but unyielding. "I heard everything, Diane." His eyes flickered to Mr. Perkins, who suddenly looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "And I brought someone who can clarify a few things for the HOA board." The woman stepped forward, opening a leather portfolio with deliberate precision. Jennifer Wilson, city attorney. Her voice was crisp, authoritative. "I believe there's been some confusion regarding HOA jurisdiction over public roads." Murmurs spread across the room. Miss S. Walsh's fingers twitched against the armrest of her chair, as if she wanted to grab her phone and start dialing for backup. Dad turned to Mr. Perkins. "Harold, I have a question for you." His voice remained even, but I could hear the edge underneath. When exactly did the HOA decide it had the authority to override city ordinances? "Mr. Perkins blustered, adjusting his glasses with a shaky hand. The HOA has the right to enforce community standards, James. And the law says otherwise." Jennifer cut in smoothly. She pulled a document from her folder and held it up for the entire room to see. City Ordinance 14. 3 explicitly protects horseback riding on public roads. Any HOA restrictions that contradict city law are legally unenforceable. The silence in the room was deafening. Miss S. Walsh's mouth opened and closed, her face now a deep shade of crimson. Dad didn't let up. This meeting should have never happened in the first place. The HOA has been overstepping for years, but tonight you went too far. He glanced around the room, at the neighbors who had come expecting a fight, expecting drama, but now they sat in stunned silence, realizing they had been misled. Then Dad smiled, not in victory, but with something far more dangerous to the HOA's power. "I think it's time we have a real conversation about who actually runs this town." And just like that, everything changed. The silence in the room stretched thick and suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. The HOA board, once smug and confident, now looked like a group of children who had been caught red-handed. Mr. Perkins swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably behind the podium. "Now, hold on a moment." Dad stepped forward. "No, Harold. You hold on. You and Diane have been playing power games in this neighborhood for years, acting like the HOA is some kind of supreme authority. But you've ignored one very important fact." Jennifer Wilson, the city attorney, laid the document flat on the table. Her voice rang through the tense air like a hammer on glass. "The HOA has no legal jurisdiction over public roads. And let me be clear, any further action taken against the Miller family regarding their horse will be considered harassment under city law." A ripple of shock passed through the audience. Neighbors who had once sat passively, letting the HOA dictate their lives, now exchanged uneasy glances. I could see the shift happening in real time. But Miss S. Walsh, she wasn't giving up that easily. She pushed herself to her feet, her face twisted with fury and humiliation. "This is a respectable neighborhood," she snapped. "We have standards. People didn't move here to live next to barn animals." I felt my fingernails dig into my palms, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "You've never had a problem with thunder before." I looked directly at her. "What changed?" She bristled, her lips curling. "The neighborhood is growing. Property values? Dad cut in sharply. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? You've convinced yourself that one well-cared-for horse is somehow more of a threat to this neighborhood than an HOA that ignores actual laws." A few people nodded in agreement. Miss S. Walsh's eyes darted around the room as she realized she was losing control. Mr. Perkins cleared his throat, scrambling for some kind of damage control. "The HOA has always acted in the best interest of Willow Creek Estates." "Then why," I said, stepping forward and holding up Dad's file, "did you approve my stable's permit 2 years ago?" Gasps. I flipped to the page with his signature in black ink. 2 years ago, you and the HOA Architectural Committee approved our stable. You knew about it. You knew it was legal. My voice shook with anger. "And now you're trying to act like you didn't?" Mr. Perkins visibly paled. Miss S. Walsh's hands clenched into fists, but before she could open her mouth, Dad delivered the final blow. "I wasn't planning to announce this yet," he said, his voice steady and strong, "but given the way this HOA has handled things, I see no reason to wait." He turned toward the room, his next words sending shockwaves through the crowd. "As of this afternoon, I was sworn in as the new mayor of Willow Creek." The room exploded in a mix of shocked gasps, murmurs, and scattered exclamations. Some neighbors turned to one another, their expressions shifting from disbelief to understanding. Others sat stone-faced, stunned into silence. But the loudest reaction of all came from Mrs. Walsh. "What?" she screeched, her voice cracking under the weight of her disbelief. Her fingers clenched into fists, her carefully maintained composure shattering before my eyes. That's impossible. Mayor Thompson was just at our fundraiser last weekend. Dad nodded, calm, unshaken, and he announced his resignation the very next day. For health reasons. The special election results were certified this afternoon. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might shake the walls. He had kept this from me, this huge, life-changing secret. And now, here he was, standing before the entire neighborhood, not just as my father, but as the most powerful person in town. You planned this, Mr. Perkins stammered, his face a deep shade of red. "You've been waiting for the right moment to humiliate us." Dad shook his head. "No, Harold. I ran for mayor because I care about this town. And I intended to keep things professional, but your little stunt forced my hand." He pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase and laid them on the table. "Here's what's going to happen now." Silence fell over the room. Everyone was listening. "As of today, the City Council will be conducting a comprehensive review of all HOA covenants to ensure they comply with municipal law. That includes reviewing whether Willow Creek Estates HOA has been abusing its power." A collective murmur ran through the audience. HOA members exchanged nervous glances. Dad turned to the police officers still standing near the door. "And while we're at it, I'd like to request an official investigation into any potential harassment or misconduct carried out by this HOA, specifically in relation to my daughter and our property." Miss S. Walsh's face drained of all color. You can't do that," she stammered. "You don't have the authority to." Dad raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I do." I bit my lip, barely able to hold back my satisfaction as Mrs. Walsh wilted in her seat. The power she had wielded so effortlessly over the neighborhood was crumbling before her eyes. "Mr." Perkins swallowed hard, attempting one last desperate grasp for control. "This is far from over, James," he hissed. "You might be mayor now, but the HOA..." Dad smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "Then I suggest you get your paperwork in order, Harold, because I have a feeling things are about to change in Willow Creek." The room fell into dead silence. And for the first time since this battle began, I knew we had won. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. News of last night's explosive HOA meeting had spread like wildfire, and by the time I walked outside to feed Thunder, people were already talking. "Mr." Rodriguez waved from across the street, a satisfied smirk on his face. "Saw the HOA page this morning," he called. "They're panicking." I barely held back a grin. "Good." I ran a hand over Thunder's smooth chestnut coat, letting his steady breathing calm my nerves. Last night had been a victory, but I knew Miss S. Walsh and Mr. Perkins weren't done fighting. They'd spent years ruling this neighborhood like their own personal kingdom. They wouldn't give up that easily. But they weren't the only ones with a plan. At exactly 10 a.m., Dad made his move. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, when a breaking news alert popped up. I blinked at the headline: Mayor James Miller announces new Willow Creek Heritage Trail Initiative. What? I gasped, clicking the article so fast my fingers fumbled. The article detailed how Dad had already been working on a city-wide initiative to restore historical riding trails throughout Willow Creek. He wanted to revive the town's deep equestrian roots, turning it into a horse-friendly community, once again, one that welcomed riders instead of shunning them. And the first official section of the Heritage Trail? The very roads HOA had tried to ban thunder from. I nearly dropped my phone. Dad hadn't just won the fight, he'd flipped the entire battlefield. A knock at the door made me jump. I rushed to open it and found Zoe standing there, holding up her phone, her jaw practically on the floor. "Your dad just broke the HOA," she whispered. I let out a breathless laugh. "Yeah, I noticed." She shoved her way inside, scrolling furiously. People are losing their minds. Half the neighborhood is thrilled. The other half is calling it a disgraceful betrayal of suburban standards. She rolled her eyes. Guess which side Miss S. Walsh is on? I didn't have to guess. By noon, a crowd had gathered in the park, where Dad had called a press conference. A local news van had shown up, cameras rolling as he laid out his plan for the town's equestrian revival. And then, like a final, poetic moment of justice, a line of horseback riders appeared on the horizon. I gasped. They came riding in from the other side of town, a mix of Western and English riders, young and old, all gathering in support. Some carried banners with the words, "Preserve our heritage." Others simply rode tall, making a statement without speaking a word. I turned to my dad, my heart swelling with pride. "This isn't just about me anymore, is it?" I whispered. Dad smiled. "No, sweetheart. This is about all of us." I had never seen Miss S. Walsh speechless before. But, as the riders trotted past, their horses' hooves striking the pavement in defiance, she stood frozen near the park entrance, her face unreadable. The very streets she had tried to control were now part of something bigger than her, bigger than the HOA. Mr. Perkins stood beside her, clutching a folder so tight his knuckles turned white. He was trying to maintain control, but it was obvious he was losing his grip. I turned my focus back to Dad, who was speaking confidently at the podium, the news cameras trained on him. "Willow Creek was built on horseback," he said, his voice strong but steady. "This town's history isn't something we should erase, it's something we should celebrate." A round of applause broke out from the crowd, and I caught sight of Mr. Rodriguez, arms crossed, nodding approvingly. Even some of the people who had originally been against me looked uncertain now, as if questioning everything they had been told. Dad continued, "The Willow Creek Heritage Trail isn't just about history, it's about community. It's about ensuring that everyone, whether they ride, walk, or simply enjoy the beauty of our town, has a place here." More cheers, more support. I looked back at Mrs. Walsh, expecting her usual sharp glare, but instead, she looked small, like she had finally realized she wasn't in charge anymore. Still, she wasn't about to go down without a fight. "This isn't over," she hissed under her breath as she turned sharply, her heels clicking against the pavement. "You won't be mayor forever, James." Dad smiled calm, knowing. "Maybe not," he said, slipping his hands into his pockets. "But the town will remember what you tried to do, Diane. And they'll remember who stood up to stop it." She flinched, her lips pressing into a thin line before she stormed away. I felt a rush of satisfaction as I watched her go. For once, she wasn't in control. That night, as I sat on the porch brushing thunder, Dad stepped outside, a tired but content smile on his face. "They're backing down," he said, sitting next to me. "Most of the board members don't want to fight us anymore. Mr. Perkins is still clinging to power, but it's only a matter of time before they push him out." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The war was over. Thunder nudged my shoulder, sensing my relief. I ran my fingers through his mane, my heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. "They really thought they could take this away from me," I murmured. Dad smiled, glancing toward the quiet streets. "People like that always think they can control everything. Until someone finally pushes back." I looked out at Willow Creek, at the town that had once felt small and suffocating but now felt alive, hopeful. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, it actually belonged to us. For the first time in weeks, the air in Willow Creek Estates felt different. It wasn't just the quiet victory over the HOA. It was the way people looked at us now, not with disdain, not with irritation, but with something closer to respect. The battle had been messy, loud, and more public than I ever imagined. But in the end, we had won. The Heritage Trail Initiative had been approved by the city, and Dad's leadership was changing everything. But even with Mr. Perkins barely holding on to his title, and the HOA's grip on the neighborhood crumbling, there was one person who hadn't fully backed down: Miss S. Walsh. She had disappeared from the HOA meetings after their defeat, but I knew better than to assume she had moved on. She was too proud for that, too stubborn to admit she was wrong. That's why, when I spotted her walking down the new trail 3 weeks later, my entire body tensed. She wasn't alone. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, skipped beside her, blonde pigtails bouncing as she pointed excitedly toward Thunder, grazing peacefully in our paddock. I stood frozen, watching as the girl turned to Miss S. Walsh, her voice carrying in the autumn air. "That's him, Grandma. That's the famous horse from the video." "Grandma?" Something stirred in my chest as I finally put the pieces together. This was her granddaughter, the one she had mentioned once in passing, the one she had always bragged about but never brought to town. Miss S. Walsh's expression was unreadable as she met my gaze from across the fence. The last time we had spoken, she was spitting insults and threats, promising that my father wouldn't be mayor forever. Now, she looked uncertain, maybe even a little tired. I could have ignored her, could have turned away, and let her stand there in her own discomfort. But something inside me wouldn't let me. Instead, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Would you like to pet him?" I asked, directing the question to the little girl. Her eyes widened in delight. "Really? Can I?" Miss S. Walsh's lips pressed together, as if she wanted to refuse. But when she looked down at her granddaughter's hopeful face, something inside her seemed to break. She let out a sigh. "Go on," she said stiffly, "but be gentle." I stepped aside as the little girl sprinted forward, reaching a small hand toward Thunder's muzzle. He exhaled softly, lowering his head as if he knew this moment meant something more than just a pat on the nose. Miss S. Walsh watched silently, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "He's so soft," the girl whispered, stroking Thunder's cheek with awe. She looked up at me, beaming. "I love him." A lump formed in my throat. I glanced at Miss S. Walsh. "She's a natural." Something flickered across her face. She looked at her granddaughter, so full of joy, so unaware of the battles fought before her, and for the first time since I had known her. Mrs. Walsh didn't look like my enemy. She looked like a grandmother. She let out a slow breath, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. "She's always wanted to ride," she admitted. The words hung between us, an unspoken truce in the making. I hesitated. Then, before I could stop myself, I spoke. "Would you like a riding lesson?" The little girl gasped, turning to Miss S. Walsh with pleading eyes. "Please, Grandma, please." Miss S. Walsh stared at me, wary, conflicted. I could see the battle waging inside her, the pride that told her to say no, the bitterness that still clung to her, but also something softer, something that maybe hadn't existed before. Finally, she nodded. "Just one," she muttered, "and only if she wears a helmet." I smiled. Deal. And just like that, the war ended not with papers or threats, but with a child's laughter and the gentle rhythm of a horse's steady heartbeat. The laughter of Miss S. Walsh's granddaughter filled the crisp autumn air, a sound I never thought I'd hear near Thunder, at least. Not with Miss S. Walsh standing close by. But there she was, watching warily, her arms crossed, yet not stopping me as I led her granddaughter through the basics of sitting in the saddle. Thunder stood perfectly still, as if he understood that this moment was delicate, that this small victory was worth more than any argument I'd ever had with the HOA. The little girl gripped the reins tightly, but looked up at me with wide, excited eyes. "I'm really riding him?" I smiled. "You sure are." She let out a joyful squeal, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something inside me ease like the last remnants of a battle I no longer needed to fight. When I glanced over at Miss S. Walsh, her expression was complicated. She wasn't scowling wasn't snapping at me about property values or HOA rules. Instead, she watched her granddaughter with a softness I had never seen before. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to understand. 3 weeks later, the first section of the Heritage Trail opened with a ribbon-cutting ceremony, a moment that should have felt surreal, yet instead felt like the most natural thing in the world. Dad stood at the front of the gathered crowd, speaking with calm confidence into the microphone. "This isn't just about horses," he said, glancing around at the dozens of people who had come out to support the initiative. "It's about history, respect, and the kind of community we want to build." The crowd applauded, and I felt a swell of pride, not just for my dad, but for everything we had fought for. People had come from all over town: horse owners, nature lovers, even people who didn't have any connection to riding but simply believed in what we were doing. And, to my complete and utter shock, Miss S. Walsh was there. She stood at the back of the crowd, arms still crossed, her usual frown not entirely gone, but not as sharp as before. Next to her, gripping her hand and bouncing with excitement, was her granddaughter. Dad finished his speech. The ribbon was cut, and then the riders took to the trail. I mounted Thunder, guiding him down the freshly cleared path, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. This was ours. No HOA, no rules, no bitter neighbors could take this away from us anymore. As I passed the main group of onlookers, my eyes met Miss S. Walsh's. For the briefest of moments, something like understanding flickered between us, and then she did something that shocked me to my core. She gave me a stiff nod, not a smile, not a warm gesture, but acknowledgement. And maybe, in the grand scheme of things, that was enough. Over the next few weeks, the mood in Willow Creek Estates shifted. Without Mr. Perkins' iron grip, the HOA took a dramatic step back, forced to acknowledge the city's authority. Many of the stricter, unnecessary rules were abandoned, and for the first time in years, it felt like the neighborhood belonged to its people again. And then the news came: Mr. Perkins had officially resigned from the HOA. The announcement spread like wildfire. Some of his loyalists fought to keep his legacy intact, but they were dwindling, powerless in the wake of everything that had happened. And just like that, his reign was over. As for Miss S. Walsh, she never admitted she was wrong. Not once, but she also never tried to fight me again. Instead, every now and then, I'd spot her walking her granddaughter near the trail, pausing just long enough for the little girl to watch the riders pass. And she never complained. One evening, as I finished brushing down Thunder, Dad leaned against the fence, watching me with one of those knowing smiles. "You surprised me today," he said. I smirked. "By winning?" He chuckled. "By offering that girl a riding lesson." He met my gaze. "You didn't have to do that. You could have just let Miss S. Walsh walk away, let her hold on to her bitterness. But you didn't." I shrugged, running a hand along Thunder's back. "I guess I just realized. Winning isn't always about making someone lose." Dad nodded, his expression proud. "That," he said, "is the kind of leadership this town needed." I laughed. "Are you saying I should run for mayor next?" He smirked. "Give it a few years." I rolled my eyes, but deep down, I knew this fight had changed me. I had learned that power didn't belong to those who demanded it. It belonged to those who stood their ground, who refused to let fear or intimidation dictate their lives. I had learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't winning a battle. It's showing your enemies that they never had control over you to begin with. And most of all, I had learned that Thunder and I had always belonged here. No matter what anyone said, no matter what rules they tried to change, this was home, and no one could take that away from us again. I woke up to the sound of hoofbeats in the distance, a rhythm that had once been the center of a neighborhood war. But now, it was a part of something greater. Throwing on my riding boots, I stepped outside, the morning air crisp against my skin. Thunder waited for me by the fence, his ears flicking forward as I approached. I smiled, running a hand down his sleek chestnut coat. We had won, not just for ourselves, but for every rider in this town. As I saddled up, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, and immediately saw the notification that made my stomach twist. HOA group post. Diane Walsh. One tapped the screen, half expecting another ridiculous last-ditch effort to control something she no longer had power over. But as I read the post, my breath hitched. Change is hard. Sometimes it's painful. But today, I watched my granddaughter ride a horse for the first time. And for the first time in my life, I understood why people fight so hard for what they love. I don't regret caring about this community, but perhaps I regret not listening more. Good luck to everyone participating in the Heritage Trail Initiative. Maybe I'll see some of you there. I reread the words, barely believing what I was seeing. Miss S. Walsh had admitted defeat, in her own way. She'd never say she was wrong outright, but she had let go of the fight. And that was more than I had ever expected. Big news? I turned to see Dad standing by the porch, coffee in hand, watching me with his signature knowing smirk. I held up the screen. He skimmed the post and let out a low whistle. Well, didn't think I'd live to see the day. I let out a laugh, still shaken by the unexpected shift. I think we broke her, Dad chuckled. Or maybe you helped her see the world differently. He took a sip of coffee, his eyes thoughtful. That's more powerful than just winning, you know. I glanced back at Thunder, my fingers running along his reins. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe the real victory wasn't just about standing my ground. It was about changing the way people saw the world. Ready to ride? I asked. Dad grinned and stepped down from the porch. Thought you'd never ask. We rode side by side, our hooves hitting the newly marked trails, winding through streets that once felt like a battlefield, but now felt like something else entirely. People waved as we passed. Some of them had fought against us. Some of them had stood by our side. And some had watched from the sidelines, waiting to see who would win before choosing where they stood. But today, no one complained. No one tried to stop us. Willow Creek Estates had changed. Maybe not overnight, and maybe not completely, but enough. Enough for this to feel like home again. As we passed the park, I noticed a group of kids near the fence. One of them pointed excitedly at Thunder. That's the horse from the video. A girl, no older than 10, turned to her mom with wide, eager eyes. Can I learn to ride someday? Her mom smiled, watching me as we passed. Maybe, she said. I turned to Dad, and he just winked. Yeah, this town was different now. And it wasn't just because of me, or even because of Dad. It was because people had started to listen. That night, I sat on the fence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Thunder stood beside me, grazing lazily, completely at peace. Zoe flopped down next to me, handing me a soda. So, she said, popping the top on hers. What now? I took a slow sip, savoring the feeling of finally being able to breathe again. Now? I said, glancing at Thunder, at the house that was finally safe, at the town that had tried to take everything from me but ended up giving me more than I ever expected. Now, we ride. And for the first time in weeks, I really knew, that nothing could take this away from me ever again. I woke to the scent of smoke. For a second, I thought I was dreaming, but then a frantic knock at the door sent a spike of fear through me. I yanked it open to find Mr. Rodriguez, his face pale. Ellie, you're stable. It's on fire. The world lurched beneath me. I ran barefoot into the night, the cold air biting at my skin, but I didn't care. Smoke curled into the sky, flames licking at the side of the stable, their glow casting long, twisted shadows. Thunder's terrified scream split through the chaos. I surged forward, but Dad grabbed me, holding me back. The firefighters are coming, he yelled. I have to get him out. I struggled against his grip, my chest tight with panic. A second later, the stable doors burst open, and through the smoke, Thunder appeared wild-eyed, covered in sweat. He reared back before bolting straight for me. I caught his reins, pressing my forehead to his as my body trembled. He was safe. That was all that mattered. Then I saw the arson report in the fire chief's hands. This was no accident. By morning, word had spread. The fire had been deliberate, and people were demanding answers. I stood in the town square, surrounded by watchful eyes, my gut telling me who was behind it. Miss S. Walsh stepped forward, her face unreadable. "I didn't do this," she said stiffly, but she knew who did. Silence stretched before she finally turned her gaze to the edge of the crowd, and there stood Mr. Perkins. Before anyone could react, he tried to slip away, but the police were already moving. "This neighborhood had rules," he spat as they cuffed him. "You ruined everything." Dad met his gaze, calm and unshaken. "No, Harold, you did." As the police car pulled away, the spell of fear the HOA had cast over Willow Creek broke. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The HOA, once unstoppable, crumbled. Mr. Perkins was removed from power, and many of the ridiculous restrictions he'd enforced were overturned. Mrs. Walsh? She never apologized outright. But one afternoon, she walked past the paddock, her granddaughter tugging at her hand. She hesitated, then spoke so softly, I almost didn't hear it. "I'm sorry." I studied her for a moment before nodding. Maybe that was enough. 1 month later, the first official ride on the Heritage Trail took place. I rode at the front, thunder moving freely beneath me, his ears flicking as laughter filled the air behind us. We had fought. We had won. And from that day on, no one would ever take this from us again. So, what's the lesson here? No matter how powerful someone seems, never let them take away what matters to you. Stand your ground, and sometimes the fight is worth it. If you've learned something from this story or been inspired, smash that like button, drop a comment, and tell me what you'd do in our shoes. Don't forget to subscribe for more crazy stories. We've only just started.